to defeat Schofield and caused serious alarm to the Union high command. The next morning, to only Hood's surprise, Schofield was gone. Hood then blamed his officers at breakfast, but the defeat rested on Hood's shoulders alone. Hood ordered the pursuit of Schofield. Schofield had no cavalry because they were scattered after the devastating charge led by Forrest. Schofield sent word to George Thomas to fix the bridges at Franklin so he could quickly march past, escape, and head to Nashville. Thomas never got the request, so once Schofield reached Franklin, he had to rebuild the bridges to get across. A note arrived at Schofield's headquarters from Thomas later on the day asking if he could hold on for 3 more days. Schofield quickly replied, "I don't know if I could hold on for 3 more hours." For the rest of the morning, Schofield was preparing for the inevitable showdown. Schofield decided on making a ring of earthworks around the small town of Franklin. He ordered trees, doors, and roofs, and even a whole cotton gin to be torn down to help in the defenses. Hood approached the battlefield from 3 separate directions, making short work of the last detachments of Schofield's army that were fighting a rear guard to Franklin. Around 11, Confederate cavalry under Forrest caught up with the rear of the Union army at Winstead Hill. An hour-long skirmish developed. The Union held out, and then after the arrival of A.P. Stewart's corps, forced the Union to withdraw under General Wagner. Hood arrived feeling slightly better, but was still driven by rage by the missed opportunity of the night prior. Hood surveyed Winstead Hill and noticed the earthworks at Franklin. The earthworks were 3 lines deep and filled with men. Hood could not see from his position on Winstead Hill that Schofield actually had 3 lines. He only saw the first 2. Now this would be very important later in the battle. Around 4 p.m., Hood decided that he would have his men storm the earthworks on all sides. All of Hood's generals were against this plan, believing it to be too costly. They all hated frontal assaults. They believed it never worked, which they were kind of right. Forrest suggested, "Give me 1 strong division of infantry with my cavalry, and within 2 hours' time, I will agree to the Federals' flank and drive them from their works." Now this is very ambitious, and Hood declined, wanting to fight the Union at Franklin where they were and not attempt anything fancy. Hood stated to his generals, "I would prefer to fight them here, where they've only had 8 hours to fortify, than strike them at Nashville, where they've been strengthening their defenses for 3 years or more." Hood's generals still felt burned by Forrest's dressing down that morning at breakfast, so they were like, "All right, Hood, if this is your plan, that's it. They're not going to fight for his career." Hood's army rushed forward around 4 under the cover of fog and formed up right before the first line, taking it. Wagner held the first line, and his men quickly routed and ran towards the second redoubt, the main redoubt. They ran towards the center, and the Confederates used the retreating Union soldiers as human shields, screaming, "Go into the earthworks with them." On the Confederate left, there were no human shields to protect the Confederate advance. The heavy Union fire devastated the Confederate lines. A blizzard of musket balls and canister shots flew into the advancing Confederates, killing many senior officers that were indispensable to Hood. In spite of this Confederate assault failing, the center broke through. Ironically, Todd Carter of the 20th Tennessee would be killed during the fighting, assaulting the grounds of his childhood home. Around the Carter house was the center of the fighting. The third line of reserves, that I say would be important later, rushed forward to the center to try to plug in the gaps that the Confederates were able to briefly make in the Union line. The Carter house would be the center of the fighting, with Confederates stubbornly holding on to the small portion of redoubts that they were able to take. Hood ordered in his reserves to reinforce the left flank around 7, but they were utterly repulsed. Around 9, the attacks ended, and the remnants of Hood's force withdrew back to their lines. The battle was a spectacular failure for the Confederates, and would be later known as one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. The only other fight to compare this to is Pickett's Charge. Matter of fact, the Battle of Franklin is nicknamed Pickett's Charge of the West. The Charge of Franklin was far worse than Pickett's Charge, with the Confederates marching 1.5 miles on an open field to reach the Union lines instead of just a mile at Gettysburg. The only reason why the Confederates suffered around the same casualties as Pickett's Charge is due to the cover of fog and the Confederates using the Union troops as human shields as they retreated to the center line. Hood lost around 7,000 men, while Pickett's Charge they lost around 6,500. Schofield, after the battle, ordered a withdrawal to Nashville, with the bridges now repaired. For the next day, Hood planned another assault, this time with the cover of 100 cannons. Their commanders were obviously disgusted by the news of another assault the following morning. Luckily for the Confederates, Schofield was long gone by the time they awoke the next day. The following day, Hood ordered a collection